chapter 1. So, have your Bibles open to Daniel chapter 1 because we're going to go verse by verse this morning. In fact, I'm not going to read it. We'll read it as we go down over it. The timing of God is always perfect. He's never late. He's never early. He's always right on time. The life that you and I have, which we live in, was God's choice for us. We are here in this country that celebrates its 250th anniversary, birthday, this Saturday. You were meant to be born here. You were meant to be born in this county, in this state, in this year. You're here this morning in this church by divine design. You were born where you were born by God's plan. You grew up where you grew up. You learned what you learned. Why? So that you can be used by God today. Knowing this and believing this actually changes your perspective. God is working all things together for good. God is in control. Your life right now has meaning. Jeremiah starts his book of prophecy with this declaration. Then the word of the Lord came to me saying, this is God speaking to Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. That's just a fancy word for being set apart. And every one of us has been set apart, okay, to God. I ordained you as a prophet to the nations. The book of Daniel, first and foremost, is a book about a man and his ministry in a unknown kingdom that he had no plan on being a part of. Prophetically, as we'll be looking in the book of Daniel, we'll see that God's word is true. His prophecies are 100% accurate. It is written down by Daniel so that we will know and see and understand God's faithfulness to his people and to us. Psalm 93:5 says, your testimonies are very sure. Holiness adorns your house, O Lord, forever. Listen to 43:10 again. I know it was just read, but listen. I'm not saying you didn't listen before, okay? But listen. You, now that in particular speaking to the children of Israel, but it's God's word and it's eternal and it's written to us as well. Okay? You are my witnesses, says the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe me and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, nor shall there be after me. In Daniel we have prophecy foretelling the future from Daniel's time, but it is still has a lot in it that we'll see as we study over the next few weeks that is still future. But everything up until this point in time has come true. And so we know because of that, everything else will come true as well. Through Daniel's life, we learn that it is possible to stand for what is right, even when everything around you is wrong. Okay? Everything around Daniel, and as we take a look at the first 6 chapters, we'll see that a whole lot of people around Daniel and his brothers were not on their side. They did all kinds of things to try to trip them up and really to try to put them to death. God made a covenant with the people of Israel. He promised them that he would care for them and bless them if they obeyed his statutes. But if they did disobey him, the law was written in such a way that he would, and he told them up front, if you don't listen to what I tell you to do, I'm going to chastise you, I'm going to discipline you, and I will scatter you among the Gentiles. Leviticus 26:33. Long before David, long before Solomon, long before Daniel, long before all the prophets, he said this through Moses, and I will scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities wasted. Israel was set aside by God to be a light to the Gentiles, to reveal him to the Gentiles. But they didn't listen. And what we are starting to cover today is the result of them not listening. Babylon was the home of idolatry. We are going to see that in the next few weeks, actually starting next week. So the Jews, because they refused to live a life separate to the one true God, and they fell into idol worship and didn't follow Jesus, or didn't follow God, God gave them up, turned them over. You want to worship idols? Let me put you in a society that's all they know. And that's what they did. And Daniel was transformed from near royalty. He was of the house of royals, of the king. And overnight, he went into captivity. His ministry spanned a period that had been prophesied by Isaiah, by Jeremiah, and others. A 70-year captivity in Babylon. He would have been no more than a teenager when he was carted off. And he lived the whole 70 years. And he was introduced to the time of the Gentiles. The time of the Gentiles. We are still in it in reality. Okay? It's not over yet. But it started here. And the time of the Gentiles was when God essentially turned the ownership and the rulership of his land and his people over to the Gentiles. And Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem, conquered Israel. We are still in the time of the Gentiles. We need to understand that it's all in his time. It's all in his time. God created time. He controls time. Our time is his time. And so we begin with verse 1 as we look at Daniel the prophet and the Babylonian conquest. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. So the very first two verses show us a fulfillment of prophecy. This isn't a prophecy, this is a fulfillment of it. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and other prophets had been speaking to them for years, saying, wake up and smell the coffee or you're out of here. Okay? God had been sending prophets to the backsliding kings of Judah, warning them that this day would come. And even though the children of Israel were God's chosen people, because of their sin, he was going to give them to the power, over to the power of their enemies, over to darkness. And their land would lie desolate. Leviticus chapter 25, listen to this. This is again Moses. The Lord said to Moses at Sinai, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years, sow your fields, and for 6 years, prune your vineyards and gather your crops. But in the 7th year, the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. So when they came into the land, God told them, your land is going to have a Sabbath rest. Every 7 years, it's mine. You give it a rest, you give it to me. They evidently didn't pay any attention to that. And now 490 years later, they had not kept one sabbatical year. Not a one. For 490 years. Any math majors in here? How many sabbatical years did they miss in 490 years? 70. How many years are now prophesied that they're going to be into captivity? 70. 70. God invented time, God created time, God started time, and God keeps time. And while he's not confined by time, time is important to him. There were several times over the next few years, starting at 605 BC. Ezekiel was taken to Babylon in 597. That's 8 years later. And the temple was destroyed in 586 and totally wiped out. And the land was totally desolate because they didn't listen to God. Then we have the king's command, verse 3. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility. He said, get me some of the wise men, get me some of the royalty, get me some of the leaders of your people, the young men, and I'm going to make them a part of our kingdom. Now, we're not told in the book of Daniel, but we know that prophecy always comes true. And so listen to what Isaiah said about this time and how it starts. Then said Isaiah to Hezekiah, this was a few kingdoms before that, a few kings before Jehoiakim. Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house and that which thy fathers have laid up in store until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, That would be the royal house, okay? Which thou shalt beget shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Not going to get deep into that, but eunuchs basically mean they no longer were able to have any descendants. Okay? They couldn't be dads anymore. And most kings did that. They didn't want any trouble from their royal court, especially because of the fact they usually had a whole lot of women to take care of them. And so they had all the men that were around him disabled. We aren't told if that happened to Daniel, but Isaiah said it would. And so we assume that it did. A great deal of time in the Old Testament, God's people never had a good following after God. But he always had a faithful remnant. Even when Elijah was all bent out of shape and he got into a little pity party and says, am I the only one? God said, no, there's 7,000 I got set aside. There's always a faithful remnant. The king went on in his degree. Youth without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge and understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace and teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The Jewish wisdom had to go. From now on, they were to learn the wisdom of the world, the wisdom of Babylon, the wisdom of false gods. They also had to learn the language. And the world speaks in a different language. God's people often have to study things that do not agree with God's word. I still remember my high school days. I remember it less and less. But I still remember certain things. And I can remember my dad in his wisdom saying, son, you're going to have to give them their answers. You don't have to believe it, but when you take the test, in order to pass that test, you're going to have to know the answers that they want. In particular, at that point in time, it was evolution. And I can remember my world history teacher was the worst, but I can remember my biology teacher telling us, basically, hey, I don't believe any of this either, but this is what I have to teach you, and I'm sorry, but you need to learn it. Because that's what the school board tells me I have to do. Even back there, that was ages ago, and it's still true. Learning the world's answers. The king assigned them a daily portion of food, verse 5, that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. The king's policy was to train the very best people. And he would then take those very best captive people and make them a part of his government and make them a part of his administration. For the next 3 years, the 4 youths were supposed to eat the king's diet, which of course was contrary to the dietary laws that they had grown up with. And so we take a look for the first time, these Hebrew captives. Who are they? Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel, he called Belshazzar. Daniel means God is my judge. Jehovah is my judge. Belshazzar, who Bel favors. Any idea who Bel would be? One of the false gods that they worshipped in Babylon. Hananiah, God is gracious. His name was changed to Shadrach, which means illuminated by the sun god, the false god of the sun. Mishael, which means who is as God. His name was changed to Meshach, who is like Venus, who was a god, a goddess, I believe. Azariah, the Lord is my help. His name was changed to the servant of Nebo, another one of the false gods of Babylon. The world doesn't like to recognize God or even God's name in any way. But each one of these four boys had God as a part of their name, and their Babylonian captors would give them new names, and they would exchange the name of God for the name of Babylonian idols, and they would be addressed by that. Maybe it would help, they thought that it would help the young men to forget their God and gradually become more like the heathen that they were living with. And so immediately we see that Daniel has a problem and he makes a request. Verse 8. But Daniel resolved. King James, I believe, says, purposed in his heart. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. The king wanted these four young men to conform to his way. Daniel didn't want to be conformed. He wanted to be transformed. He didn't want to be a conformer. Paul actually would bring this up later on in the book of Romans. But be not conformed to the thinking of this world, but ye be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Don't think the way the world thinks. Think as I think. Daniel and his three buddies were transformers, not conformers. And Daniel purposed in his heart not to be defiled by what went into his body. He wasn't rude. He wasn't obnoxious. He wasn't really even demanding. He just says, I don't want to defile myself. He pursued it in an objective, in a respectful, in a submissive manner, but he still purposed in his heart, and God probably used Daniel's attitude and softened the heart of the eunuch that was telling him what to do. But even then, the eunuch wasn't real happy about it. A little bit behind, I'll catch up. Daniel's request and the eunuch's reluctance. Verse 10. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned you your food and your drink. For why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. The eunuch feared that if Daniel got his way, he's going to be held responsible and he's going to be put to death. And he realized that. And Daniel came back with a proposition. He said this. Then Daniel said to the steward whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let your appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. Their desire. The 4 Jewish students didn't threaten anyone. They didn't stage a protest. They didn't burn down any buildings. They simply excelled in their studies, acted like gentlemen, and said to the guy, let us eat what we know is good for us. And if it's not good for us, it'll become obvious and we'll go to the king's food. But if it becomes obvious that what we eat is good for us, then we ask that you allow that to continue. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. Now, it probably wasn't a simple, it probably was a good variety of vegetables, okay? You know, God has always had a hand in what we eat. Probably never thought about that before, but he's always had a hand in what we put into our mouth. He's always had rules. You could start with the Garden of Eden. He said, eat anything in the garden, but not that. But he also said in verse 29 of Genesis 1, behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree that with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heaven, to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. Do you know that the diet of Eden was vegetarian? But it went actually beyond that. I don't know whether you caught that or not. What did the animals eat? Did the animals eat each other? Were there man-eating lions? No, there were grass-eating lions. All the animals. Now, that earth became corrupted. In fact, there was much violence in the land when the flood came. And even the animals were doing what they weren't supposed to be doing by that point. And we see that even in the fossil record. We see animals eating each other, buried rapidly. After the flood, God again gave a command. He said, chapter 9, verse 3, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. Do plants move? Well, they wave in the wind, but they don't move, do they? So what's he talking about? Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, and as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And so you had to kill it and drain the blood off of it, but you could eat it. Everything. And that worked until we got to Mount Sinai. After the law, God said, this is what you're going to have to eat. Leviticus chapter 11, Deuteronomy, I think, 14 are lists what you're allowed to eat under the law. Leviticus 11:3 says you may eat any animal that has a split hoof, completely divided, and that chews the cud. That would include cattle, sheep, goats, I think deer, by the way, venison. If they didn't meet both those criteria, then they weren't allowed to eat it. That cut out pigs, camels, and they were deemed unclean. But a lot of meat, in the diet of the Hebrew people. Sea creatures. Of all the creatures living in the water, you may eat any that have fins and scales. You're allowed to eat fish. That doesn't include shrimp, which I'm not real happy with. But I like shrimp and I like crab legs. That really isn't kosher food under the law. Okay? There were certain birds prohibited. Eagles, vultures, owls. You weren't allowed to eat. I wouldn't want to eat an owl because you can't get them not to look at you. They just keep turning their head. How can you eat something that keeps on staring at you in the face? Insects were included in the Hebrew diet. Locusts, katydids, crickets, grasshoppers. After Christ, Acts chapter 10, Peter has a dream, and he sees this food coming down from heaven, and it says, opens up, says, take and eat. And it opened up everything. There weren't any unkosher things anymore. So shellfish are now okay. And bacon's okay. But they did come up with one other thing that sort of ties in with this. They were not supposed to eat things that were sacrificed to false gods, to idols. And that is probably more than anything what made these Hebrew children say, no, we don't want the king's food. Because most of the king's food probably would have been sacrificed to idols. That's how they got their food. They made the people make sacrifices. The sacrifices came in. The priests picked out the best. Here, this is for the king. This is for the king. This is for the king. And that's what they would eat. At the end of the 10 days, it seemed that they were better in appearance and fatter in the flesh. Eating vegetables. I eat broccoli all the time. It doesn't seem to help me at all. But it is supposed to keep my heart healthy. Fatter in the flesh than all the youth who ate the king's food, so that the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. For the next 3 years, they ate their diet. And because they didn't eat of the king's food, God gave these 4 men swift and suitable reward. He gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. They become trustworthy. As for these 4 youth, God gave them learning and skill in all literature, verse 17, and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding of all visions and dreams at the end of the time. What's the time here? You have to go clear back to the beginning. How long a period of time had now passed? 3 years. At the end of 3 years, the 10 days was for the eunuch to be convinced. But they still had to stand before the king, and that didn't happen till the end of the 3 years. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king spoke with them. And among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They became proficient in all the science, in all the subject matter that they were studying. Daniel became proficient in understanding dreams and visions. They were spiritually revived, revealed. They profited spiritually. They profited with royal exaltation. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the king spoke with them. They had become proficient in everything. Therefore, they stood before the king. Verse 19, excuse me. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and the enchanters that were in his kingdom. The time was up. They went before the king. The king inspected him, and they passed with flying colors. He outshone them all, 10 times better than everybody else. And chapter 1 closes with just this sentence. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. In that one verse passes another 67 years. 70 years. Daniel was there. He saw the beginning of the captivity, and he saw it till the end. And as Cyrus comes on, Daniel talks to Cyrus. We'll look at that when it happens. But he says, hey, our prophets told us you were coming by name. God knew who you were way before you even were born. And our prophets wrote down that you're going to be the guy that lets us go back home. And at the end of his life, Daniel gets to wave goodbye to the remnant that goes back. Probably with the book of Jeremiah in one hand, and the other hand lifted up in praise to God. God's good. As we take a look at the book of Daniel, we're going to be looking a lot of prophecy. Even Jesus, when he began his ministry, Luke chapter 4, verse 16 says, he took opened up the scroll of Isaiah. That was the Torah reading of the day. And Jesus wrote from Isaiah 61, and as he read it, he then rolled it up and said, today, that prophecy's fulfilled with me. Jesus Christ is coming back. And we are called to be Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of our time. You don't believe that? Listen to what I preached on. Chapter 3, 1 John, verses 2 and 3. Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And everyone who has this hope, what hope? The hope that he's going to come back and we'll see him. In him purifies himself just as he is pure. Everyone that has that hope purposes in their heart to live for him. Now, I've got to admit, we live in a generation that is different from every generation up to this generation. I will admit that when I was in college, prophecy was coming to the forefront. And it hasn't gone back any. It's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. But Daniel chapter 12 says that. But you, Daniel, verse 4, shut up the words and seal the book. What book? This book. Until the time of the end. Till what time? Till the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. All that is saying is that there's going to be more and more knowledge. We're going to understand it more and more and more and more. And that is true. I open up the Bible today and there's new things jumping off the page at me. Stuff that I've read for years. I said, I never saw that before. Verse 9 of chapter 12. Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. And many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined. But the wicked shall act wickedly. What's he saying? Those that read the book and understand the book, they're going to get ready. And everybody else is going to say, where is this coming that you've talked about? The world just keeps on going on. We are living in the last days. Daniel chapter 2, verse 44, which we'll take a look at next week, says this, and in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. That is a verse from chapter 2, which is in part the first 6 chapters of Daniel's sort of story in history that we read. There's not prophecy as such. The last 6 chapters is all prophecy. Okay? But in the first 6 chapters, there's still prophecy there. And that's a prophecy when Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, that statue that he dreamed about is knocked down by a rock, not formed by human hands. And that rock grows into a kingdom that encompasses all the rest of the kingdom. Guess what kingdom that's talking about? It's not here yet, but it's coming. Daniel brings about and introduces the time of the Gentiles. He'll talk more about that, but he also talks about the time of the end of the Great Tribulation, the end of the world as we know it, and the setting up of the millennial kingdom of Christ. All that is in there. So if all that is still ahead, how should we then live? It's our turn now. You know, it's not Daniel's turn anymore. Now we're learning more about Daniel than we ever have, right? But Daniel's not here anymore. But who's still here? We are. It's our turn to purpose in our heart. It's our turn to resolve. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not allow the world to defile him, that he would live to please God. He became a man of prayer. We'll see that as we move along. He knew how to pray. 3 times a day he prayed towards Jerusalem. And I have a feeling that he prayed a lot more than that. I have a feeling that he had an all-night prayer session when he was down there with the lions. I would. And I would suspect the 3 Hebrew brothers in that fiery furnace, they probably had a good time of prayer going on in there too. And then the last P, purpose, prayer, and prepare. We are to watch therefore for such an hour that you think not the Son of Man is coming. Be ready, be watchful. Be busy doing God's work. That's where we ought to be. That's what we ought to be doing. Dare to be the Daniel. Are you a Daniel? Or are you just a nobody? Guess what? There aren't any nobodies in God's kingdom. Yes?
Can you tell us why the Jewish people will not eat pork?
It's not kosher. I don't know, but we're not under Jewish law, thank the Lord, because I have bacon and sausage almost daily. It was considered an unclean meat, and all of those dietary laws was to set them apart from the world.